Hey gang. You know, when I'm introducing someone to the hobby of modern games, I often liken it to introducing someone who's never read a book to literature. It's a world of entertainment, but it can be pretty daunting given the massive range and depth of choice that we now enjoy. We've got our short stories and our comedies, and we have our novels and our tragedies. And where literature has Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, we have Meglio-Magi and Nepatello's War of the Ring. There comes a time for most of us when we want to set aside the light card games, the fillers, the medium weight family games, wonderful as all of those are, and devote an entire evening to a single grand story, one world which we'll inhabit and change and be engaged by and engrossed with. And from the moment that you see the War of the Ring box, its size and weight and its evocative cover art, it screams to you, I can give you those things it promises. And from the moment that you open this box, it delivers. Look at this lunacy! Look at the size of the board! It has to be split into two pieces because it's so ridiculously gigantic. It's teasing you with the scale of the story you're going to play out on its plane. But this is only the first thing that you see when you open the box. Next comes all the peoples and characters who inhabit Tolkien's world. Hundreds of plastic men, goblins, orcs, wizards, and hobbits, beautifully sculpted and detailed, ready to take their place in your story. Even these beautiful tarot-sized cards look and feel right. And if you'd like to see some artifacts from Middle-earth, feast your eyes on some of the most gorgeous dice in all of gaming. They seem carved out of some mystic marble material with beautiful runic emblems etched into them. And when armies collide, you roll these awful abominations. I'd really like to know what the production meeting went like at Ares Games when they decided to cut this particular corner. Listen, I'm beginning to get a bit concerned about this War of the Ring thing. I mean, we've got this giant board and hundreds of minis, and I'm worried it's getting a bit expensive. Oh, no problem. You know those dice players roll when they're resolving those epoch-ending cataclysmic battles? We'll just source the lowest possible quality that we can find. Sorted. It's crazy. And amongst all this luxury, they stick out like a jolly elf at a hobbit wake. Do yourself a favour. Get rid of this rubbish. Upgrade. So the stage is finally set, and it is ocular ecstasy, grand and imposing in equal measure. One player surveys his vast host, the Dark Lord of the Shadow, while the other cocks his walls and rallies the free peoples. Because now we come to one of a slate of brilliant design decisions. War of the Ring features highly asymmetric play. Both players are actually playing very different games. The Shadow is intent on subjugating and destroying the free peoples and uses his limitless forces to overwhelm them. If he conquers enough of their strongholds, such as Minas Tirith and Helm's Deep, all is lost for the free peoples. Of course, this is part of the Shadow's true desire to recover his power, the ring, held by the ring-bearer, Frodo. Corrupt the ring-bearer, and victory is assured. The free peoples know this. Their one chance at victory lies in the hands of the Fellowship of the Ring, tasked with travelling clean across Middle-earth to Mount Doom, where the ring may be destroyed. Or they could make a bold play, sallying out from their strongholds, taking the fight to the Shadow. If they could take just a few Shadow strongholds, the Dark Lord would be too distracted to stop the Fellowship, and the ring would be destroyed. This extreme asymmetry in goal is amplified by the way the two opposing sides play and the resources that are available to them. It really does feel like you're playing a completely different game depending on what side you're on. And each side has its own set of intense challenges, mortal fears, as well as offering the opportunity to have innovative plays and satisfying victories. Take the units available to you, for instance. In general, you have regular units, elites, and leaders. Now, the Shadow has plenty of everything, and if one of them dies, throw them back on the pile ready to be recruited again. The Free Peoples, on the other hand, are a very different story. They have a very limited pool of troops whom they can recruit. And while the elves have many elites and few regulars, the men of Gondor have many regulars but not many elites. And when one of those brave souls dies, they go to a place from which they cannot return. They're completely removed from the game, permanently, forever weakening the Free Peoples. So while to the Shadow every death is an acceptable loss, whether that orc was assaulting Helm's Deep or making breakfast, the Free Peoples player feels every loss as a brutal blow. It forces you to care about your troops and instills a need to protect them, even though you know they're not all going to survive. Now, this is masterful design. It's not only creating a very different emotional state for both players, but an attitude as well. On top of that, it's playing to the thematic truth on which the game is based. And I find that utterly fascinating. It's exactly the same for these beautiful objects. These dice are what drive the game. At the start of the round, the Free Peoples gather their few and the Shadow gather their many, and you both roll. Then you simply take turns choosing one of your dice and resolving it. Each inscription corresponds to a set of actions you could take, such as recruiting troops or playing cards, moving armies and characters. Of course, it's not as simple as all that. For one, as you'd expect, each side have different dice, with the Free Peoples focusing more on their characters and fellowship, while the Shadow targets bloody war and his hunt for the ring. See, if the Shadow rolls any of these lidless eyes, that represents his desire, his need to recover his ring. These dice can't be used for normal actions. In fact, they're removed from his pool, but they're not wasted. They go to strengthening the hunt for the ring, making it much harder for the Fellowship to move unseen through Middle-earth and easier for the Shadow to corrupt the ring-bearer. The thing is, that might not be what the Shadow really wanted to do this turn, but the ring is an eternal distraction for Shadow, drawing his gaze, even at inopportune times. Again, the designers have constructed a method whereby, as a player, you feel like the Shadow, you feel that distraction. The thematic connection is as strong as it possibly can be, but the truly remarkable thing is that not only does it give flesh to the fantasy, it's a fascinating gameplay element. It's keeping both players on their toes. With this one design decision, we see the thematic and emotional aspects of the game improved, as well as the mechanical gameplay. It's beautiful. Now, I'll bet some of you dice haters are getting a bit worried. What? A grand epic strategy game based around dice rolls? It's an absolute luck fest. Wrong, 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 my friend. Let me explain to you why in the gamut of exceptional design decisions in this game, these dice might just be the best one. We've already seen how they're one of many ways used to provide different experiences to the players depending on their number and type. But there's more to it than that. These are the very heart of the game, and all of the power and weight of your decisions, all of the incredible storytelling that unfolds, it all flows from here. You look at the board and of course there's 100 things you want to do, but if you've only got 5 dice, you're forced to prioritize, immediately making horrible decisions like which strongholds aren't receiving reinforcements or where to focus your attacks. It also means that each time you choose a die to resolve, there's a heavy opportunity cost involved. There's a dozen different things you could have done with that die, and maybe you should have waited until later to pick it. Each turn, you're confronted with a diabolical puzzle, a puzzle with high stakes, incredible tension, and many solutions, any one of which can be ruined by your opponent. But there's no such thing as a bad roll. The skill in the game is in adapting. And because you can never be sure of getting exactly what you need in future, you'd better be planning ahead. contingencies and backup plans. But that's not to say there aren't ways of getting what you want when you really need it. The Free Peoples have access to the 3 elven rings. Each one can be used to manipulate a die to the face that you want. But that ring then becomes corrupted and can be used by the shadow player before being consumed. Plus, you only get 3 of them. 3 uses for the entire game. But the temptation is ever present because they could be used for something great on every turn. Such is the allure of the rings. And of course, the shadow player is constantly whispering in your ear, use them. Use the power. It benefits him. Are things starting to become clear? It's choices like these and that requirement to subsist on what you've got that not only gives you the feeling of consequence-laden choices, but gives rise to an incredible story played across the span of the game. Perhaps the Free Peoples has gotten wind of a swarm of shadow amassing outside Lorien, but they just can't get troops there in time to reinforce. But the Fellowship is close by. Perhaps it's time for Boromir to take his leave and lead the armies of Lorien. He may well fall, but he may well buy just enough time for reinforcements to arrive. A victory for the Free Peoples, perhaps, but in either case, the Fellowship must now continue on without the Son of Gondor. Every turn has these powerful moments that carry a strong narrative that emerges purely from play. It's exhilarating to see it unfold and to know that this incredible story is being told just by you and your opponent. By the end of the game, you've both lived through an epic with the tale of the Fellowship being told alongside this colossal war and frequently intertwined with it. And no matter what incredible events occur, the arc always seems like it would have made an amazing book. And that's probably the most amazing thing about this game, is that each time you sit down to play, you get to tell your own version of Lord of the Rings. Which strongholds fall, where the great battles take place, if and how the Fellowship is broken, and the role the characters within take in the war. There's room for great sacrifices and time for heart-rending defeats and all the emotional swings of a truly good story. And the story you tell is cohesive. It makes sense because it's driven by genuine need rather than idle desire. Part of what makes it work so well is that this game really is Lord of the Rings in a box. Almost everything is here, and a lot of it is on these beautiful tarot-sized cards. You have character cards which focus on your characters and tactics, and strategy cards which focus on strategy and your armies. Each one has a character or an event from the books which you can have occur, providing you have the die to enact it. And there's a mountain of these, and they're full of all sorts. Yes, even Tom Bombadil. But as you should know by now, adventures aren't all pony rides in May sunshine. These same cards can also be used in battle, giving you the edge needed to claim victory. So whether you want to use the card as an event or in battle, you're throwing away the chance to use the other ability. And it can be really important. You might be planning some grand strategy based on one of the cards in your hand, but you've found yourself in a battle which you really need to win and it's not going well. Should you use the event for its battle ability? These are the kind of decisions that you're forced to make throughout the entire game, and you're constantly managing your hand of cards, coveting those which you plan to use later, often to the detriment of the now. In a single game, you're likely to have many important battles. You're just going to have to use your cards for some of them. The battle's too important to lose. And generally, those battles are resolved quickly and simply. You work out how many dice you roll based on the number of units that you have in the battle, and then you roll. 5s and 6s cause casualties, which are removed. Leaders let you re-roll some dice, and cards have special effects, but other than that, that's it. This dice rolling is stochastic combat, and it's perfectly applied here in War of the Ring, where deterministic combat would render the affair stolid and calculable. The dice rolling keeps things exciting, slightly unpredictable, and allows for those occasional miracles or disasters. But those are rare, and in general, a greater force will triumph. Though that might take some time. Most of the time, Shadow will greatly outnumber the puny Free People's forces, but that doesn't mean that they're throwing buckets of dice. No matter how big your force, you're always restricted to a maximum of 5 dice. And that makes sense. Just because you have 1,000 orcs doesn't mean they can all be swinging their swords at the same time. You need to attack in waves. But a larger force can take many more casualties before they start losing dice, their combat effectiveness. And so in general, they can outlast their opponent. But Shadow doesn't want attrition. He wants to crush the Free Peoples fast. That's made all the harder by the Free People's strongholds, which they can retreat into, slowing down the Shadow's advance. Usually, battles continue until an army retreats or is destroyed, but strongholds are difficult and time-consuming to attack, so combat ends after one roll of the dice. If Shadow wants more blood, he'll have to spend one of his precious action dice, or he could press the attack, throwing bodies at the gates, taking casualties to continue the attack. For the life-loving Free People sheltered inside, that is terrifying. There are also fortifications which give you a defensive bonus. There are 2 of these. In the entire world, there are 2 places. Yet they have special rules applied just to them. And that's not very good, is it? That's not very elegant. I mean, what are they there for? Balance? Well, if that's the case, there'd be much better ways of handling it than adding yet more cognitive load onto your players by adding more rules to an already rules-heavy game. That's just bad design, right? Oh, wrong again. Let's talk about where this decision came from. Modern games owe a huge debt to the old war games in terms of design ideas and development, and War of the Ring really is a war game at heart. Now, these old war games came about because some people really liked playing with toy soldiers. And as they grew older, they wanted that pleasure and experience to grow with them. Now, the birth of the genre can arguably be attributed to H.G. Wells's publication Little Wars, which defined concrete rules about playing with toy soldiers for boys, adult men, and even that more intelligent sort of girl who likes boys' games and books. Now, half a century later, these people started seriously thinking about games, about how they worked and what they were, and they started exploring what they could do. And their first instinct was quite obvious. Let's make them super realistic. That'll be cool. So began the slow march toward the ultra-complicated simulation games, the invention of the combat results table, games with rulebooks so massive they would eat other games' rulebooks, culminating in games the likes of the infamous Campaign for North Africa, where rules for every eventuality and possible permutation are laid out, which reputedly takes 1,500 hours to complete a single game and contains such trivialities as the Italian troops needing extra water rations to cook their dried pasta, or they get grumpy. Of course, people quickly realized that while this type of experience was a thrill for a few, most found that they didn't really feel like a combat commander or a general. The decisions that they made were interspersed with long passages of rules lookups and referencing. And ultimately, it just wasn't that fun. So by the time flares were becoming popular, many of these designers pulled back, now armed with the knowledge that in general, game design lies on a spectrum. On one hand, the abstract with few and generally simple rules but little thematic or emotional engagement. And on the other, these simulations, grand, detailed, unplayably fleshed out worlds where everything makes sense and everything happens for a reason, but you'd better check page 114 to find out what it is. And most of the really exceptional modern games aim to find a balance between being accessible and learnable and thematic and expressive. Of course, where on the spectrum you like to play is something you discover as you explore the hobby, but in the case of War of the Ring, considering what it's trying to achieve, the balance is simply perfect. There could be 100 rules about terrain and battle modification and whatnot, but that doesn't really add anything to the story of Lord of the Rings. But for fans of the story, these fortifications in Osgiliath and the men stationed there at the start of the game mean something, and they form anchors for your storytelling to take place over. These extra rules buy greater thematic immersion and at an exceptional exchange rate. Just like the rules that let Gandalf the Grey return as Gandalf the White, or have Strider named as Aragorn, heir to Isildur, or the political track, which has many of the nations reluctant to declare war, nations like Rohan, which are hobbled at the start of the game unless you can stir them to action. Or the difference it makes depending on who you have lead the Fellowship, and each character's different abilities, or the fact that Gimli and Legolas can travel to the homes of their people and convincing them to join the war, or the Nazgul who can fly across the map reinforcing the Shadow's armies or harrying the Fellowship. Dozens of little touches and thematic nods that propel the game from excellent to extraordinary. This version of War of the Ring is the second edition, and its long pedigree really shows. Every rule is there for a very good reason, and they're woven together to serve as the canvas for you to create something spectacular. From the first turn, there's theatrics and drama, and the purest expression of that happens when the Shadow hunts the ring. Whenever the Fellowship attempts to move in secret, the Shadow has a chance to discover them. He rolls a number of dice depending on how focused on hunting he is that round, and if he's successful, the Fellowship is in trouble. Perhaps a scouting party of orcs has found them, or one of the Dark Lord's agents has captured them. Well, we find out just how damaging this event is using the bag. You don't actually get a bag with the game, and that's a production decision I understand, but the tiles inside are the real stars of this show. When the Shadow hunts successfully, he pulls one from the bag, and they are horrible. They can do things like reveal the Fellowship, opening them up to some truly horrific events perpetrated by the Shadow player if the Free Peoples can't hide them again quickly. But the real pain comes from these numbers. This symbolises the threat this encounter poses to the Fellowship. But don't worry, Frodo can get them out of it. See, he's got this ring which makes him invisible. He can just slip it on and get away. Happy days. True, it will draw him closer to darkness, and if his corruption ever reaches 12, he's lost, and the Dark Shadow wins. So maybe not then. But the alternative is no brighter. To escape, one of the Fellowship will have to lay down their lives so that the others can escape. Oh, okay, you say. Well, we'll just have to go on without Pippin. You monster. Unfortunately, it's fate that decides who makes the ultimate sacrifice, so it may well be poor Pippin. Or it could be Strider. Gondor loses their future king. So the hunt is a big deal, high stakes, but the Fellowship has to move if they want to get to Mount Doom. And let me tell you, it doesn't matter what side you're on, the hunts are some of the most panic-inducing, tense moments that you could ever possibly hope to have from a game. Both sides are praying for success or failure, and when the bag is picked up, promises to deities are doubled. Oh, please be merciful. Please be brutal. In the final hours of the game, the whole thing can be decided here, and it's sensational. And it's scintillating the first time it happens in a game, but the stakes only get bigger and bigger as time goes by, as the Fellowship draws nearer and nearer to the mountain, and the membership of the Fellowship dwindle, and Frodo's corruption grows higher and higher. Each pool becomes more and more tense and exciting. It's just phenomenal. And because the game is so well designed, that's pretty much the story across the entire game. Each turn seems to up the ante in terms of drama and what's on the line, and it all builds on the story told up to that point. You know, people often talk about the stand-up die roll. You know, that moment that the entire game seems to have led up to, that's so crucial and important that you feel the human compulsion to stand up as you prepare to roll the die. I once had a game of War of the Ring. I was playing the Free Peoples and my line of defence was broken and the Shadow was racing to claim the last of my strongholds. Frodo and Sam were on their own. Frodo's corruption was nearly complete, but they were also mere steps from the peak of Mount Doom. It was then that my opponent and I realised that at some point we'd both risen to our feet. There was just so much tension and excitement, we couldn't sit down. We had that stand-up die roll feeling for half an hour. That's what War of the Ring offers. And only a game with the scale and scope of War of the Ring can hope to give you this kind of experience. But ultimately, while that's War of the Ring's greatest triumph, it's also its biggest shortcoming. Just like the epics in literature, it requires more from you as a player and the opponent that you'll play against. It requires a much greater investment in time and in thought. I mean, the rulebook is one of the largest you will ever read for a board game. Setup is an absolute bear. You need to set out all the tokens and the exact correct units in their specific locations, and telling apart the units can be a real pain because although they're beautiful, they're all the same colour, and it's important whether you've just killed a Rohan regular or a Gondor regular. Oh, and of course, you've got to be careful you don't mix up units which are permanently dead and units which are just waiting to be recruited. And really, the Free People's player needs to know how many of each type of unit he has left, so you need some sort of system to keep everything organised. But even if you have the time to do that, it's just going to take up more space for a game that already devours a good-sized table just for the board. There's lots that this game demands from you, but just as with the epics in literature, War of the Ring can offer you something that the novels can't. There's magic in here, and hopefully I've given you some insight into where it comes from, but a major ingredient in that magic is your investment. What you put in comes back tenfold, but you have to put it in there in the first place. That's why a lot of games that offer an epic game in a shorter, smaller package can't ever fully deliver on their promise. They might capture the essence of some small elements, but without the time to distill your investment to grow and mature, the magic can't ever be complete, can't ever be pure like it is here. And ultimately, that's the key. That's what you've got to decide when you're working out if this is a game you should buy. Is it worth it? Yeah, there's plenty to consider here. If you're not into direct confrontation, then, well, why are you even watching this? And if you hate Lord of the Rings, then forget about it. The theme and the game are one and the same and they're inseparable. But otherwise, you have to make up your mind as to whether it's worth paying the entry price to have this unique experience, to play one of the best games ever designed. One so highly regarded that on the BGG Top 10 Thematic Games, it technically appears twice. But you could play 3 or 4 excellent games in the same amount of time it takes to play War of the Ring just once. And even I don't want that all the time. But now and then, I want it. I want that rarefied magic. And War of the Ring is one of the only ways you can get that. Well, that is it, gang. That's War of the Ring, one of the biggest games I'm likely to ever review, so thank you for sticking with me through all of that. I hope you have a better idea now if it's right for you or if you should avoid it. And as always, I love hearing from you guys. If you have any questions or comments about this review, please do get in touch. Or if you have any ideas about how I can improve my videos, let me know. I'll summarise any interesting discussions that come out of that in a separate video on my channel. But for now, you can look forward to a much smaller review from me next time. I'll see you then.